So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining the Citizens Advisory Committee for Lake Champlain. It's great to see so many of you. I'm Denise Smith. I'm the chair, and I live in the Northern Lake in St. Albans. And I guess we can go around. Do you want me to call on people, Katie?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Mark, since you're next to me on my camera.
Hi, Denise. Good to see everybody. Mark Nod. I am a CAC member in South Hero in the Islands and a environmental and land use attorney.
Stephanie. I'm not going to go CAC and guest. I'll just go the way that I'm seeing people.
Hi, everyone. Stephanie Smith. I'm a guest State Hazard Mitigation Officer at Vermont Emergency Management.
Great. Thank you for coming and joining us and sharing your knowledge with us. Dr. Bowden. Brett.
Yes, Denise, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Breck Bowden, retired professor from the University of Vermont Rubenstein School, and just rotating onto the CAC, so this is my first official meeting.
I hope you had a nice time away.
We had a wonderful time.
Good. We're glad you're back and that you're here, and thanks for joining us.
You bet.
Cree, I see next.
Yes, citizen participant from Shelburne, and I am part of the Water Caucus that meets weekly. John Groveman is the facilitator for that, and we're doing a lot of work on S213.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Hillary.
Hi, Hillary Solomon, South Lake member, the CAC member representing the southern part of the lake watershed, and I work for the Poultney Meadowy Natural Resources Conservation District.
Thanks. Stephen.
Hi. Actually, it's Lynn Hale, and I'm an interested citizen.
Great. Where do you live, Lynn? Which town are you from?
Charlotte.
Charlotte. Great. Thank you. Welcome. Let's see. I will go to Bob Fisher. I don't see your face, but I see your hand up. Can you hear me, Bob?
I'm sorry, I had another call. Yes, this is Bob Fisher. I'm the Water Quality Superintendent for South Burlington, Vermont. I live in Barrie, and I am the current New England Water Environment Association past president. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're on the CAC. Did you say that? Did I miss that?
Sorry, I've been on the CAC for at least 15 years. Thank you.
Great. Let's see. I will go. Things are moving around on my screen, so if I call on you twice or don't call on you, I apologize. Karina, since you just popped up.
Hi, are we doing introductions?
Yes. Yeah, we have a lot of guests on our call tonight.
Oh, great. I'm Karina Daly, restoration ecologist with VNRC, and I live in Jericho, and glad to be here.
Lauren Sofer.
Hello, everyone. Lauren Sofer. I work for the Department of Environmental Conservation on the Clean Water Initiative program team as an environmental analyst. And Sarah Coleman couldn't make it today. I'm on the same team as Sarah.
Oh, great.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to meet you, Lauren. Thanks for joining us. Let's see, Representative Dolan.
Just sign on. Hi, everyone.
Just name and...
Oh, Carrie Dolan,
Yep.
representative for Washington 2 District, which is Warren, Waitsfield, Facein, Moretown, and Duxbury.
Good CAC member, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I'm in the Appropriations Committee.
Appropriations, great. Laura Lapierre.
Hi, I'm Laura Lapierre. I work for the Department of Environmental Conservation's Wetlands Program, and I'm here as a guest today to present.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Laura.
Meg Modley.
Hi, all. Meg Modley, Lake Champlain Basin Program. I work on healthy ecosystems and aquatic invasive species.
Thanks for joining us. Representative Odie?
Hi, I'm Representative Carol Odie from the far north end of Burlington, and I'm on the Lake Champlain Citizens Advisory Committee.
And Lori Fisher, thank you. Lori Fisher?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Fisher, a representative on the CAC from Williston and Executive Director of the Lake Champlain Committee. And nice to see everyone, and thanks for coming tonight, everyone. And sorry to be off camera, but I'm having connectivity issues.
No worries. We're glad to hear your voice. Michael Bard?
Yes, glad to see you all. My name's Mike Bard. I'm from Waterbury. I'm a selectman in town. I'm a former program director at USDA Rural Development. I've been our town's conservation chair as well, and very interested in outdoor, former president of the Lake Champlain Walleye Association and a district chair for Ducks Unlimited. So interested in joining you potentially on the board. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I have one more, Colin Powers.
Hi, everybody. Hello, I'm on the New York CAC, dropping in for your presentations today. Thank you so much. And I am also a member of the Boquete River Association and live directly on the river here in Wadhams, New York.
Great. Well, welcome. Did I call on everybody? Is there anybody I missed? I see May Kate just came on.
Hi.
Hi. We're just doing intros.
Okay, thanks. May Kate Campbell with the Lake Champlain Basin Program.
Great. Thanks for joining us, May Kate.
Yeah, thanks.
Is there anybody on the call that I missed that I can't see for whatever reason on my screen? All right. Well, with that, then we do have a quorum now, I believe. Katie? Yeah, we're well over one. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for our March meeting. I think we'll jump right into the agenda. Do you want to pull it up, Katie?
Sure. If you just want to call for public comments while I'm getting that ready.
That would be great. Thank you. Any public comments tonight? All right, with no public comments then, why don't we do our review of the February 12th meeting? Everybody had a chance to review those notes, those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second, it's Lori Fisher.
Thanks, Lori. And all those in favor? Just say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? I think everybody was at that meeting.
I should abstain.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yep. Do we need to have a discussion? No, we're good, right? That's it. I should have called the discussion after the second. Okay. All right, so next we are welcoming Stephanie Smith to join us from the State Hazard Mitigation. She's State Hazard Mitigation Officer for the Vermont Emergency Management, Vermont VEM, I'll just say that. And she's here to talk to us tonight about climate resilience and flood relief program.
Great, thanks, Jace. You got it, Vermont Emergency Management. And let me share my screen.
Great, you can jump right in, thanks.
All right. Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I was not familiar with this group, so I was reading a little bit on the site, which was very interesting to learn about. Okay, there we go. And then in Zoom, I always lose the people, so I have to figure out how to get you guys back.
I can definitely see your screen though.
Okay, I have two giant screens, so my presentation's over here, but I want to be able to still see you guys. All right. So thank you so much for having me. As was just stated, I'm Stephanie Smith. I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at Vermont Emergency Management. So I manage our hazard mitigation program for the state. Most of what I'll talk about today is the funding that we have available, but I always start here with Vermont Stronger, which is our state hazard mitigation plan. So we have this state plan that we update every 5 years. We're required to by FEMA in order to receive funding under hazard mitigation and other FEMA programs as well. So it's a document that lays out all of the natural hazards that the state is potentially vulnerable to, and it proposes a strategy for reducing our risk. So it cuts across state government. It includes stakeholders from outside of state government as well to look at snow and ice, to look at drought, to look at heat. And then the top 2 ranking hazards on our list are flooding. So starting with fluvial erosion being the most significant hazard of concern within this plan, and then inundation flooding being second. So those,
Resilient.
I think someone was unmuted, but you got it. Thank you. So those are the top 2 hazards that we address through this plan. So fluvial erosion is a really big focus of it, and inundation flooding as well. So also, if people have questions on the state plan, I'm happy to talk more about that. But I wanted to focus in quickly today on the types of projects that we fund through our grant programs. And then I'll go through the programs. There's 2 in particular that we have a lot of money in right now. So I'll focus on those, but I'll give you the list of the programs. So across the board, property buyouts have been the #1 thing that we funded by the numbers. So we've done about 170 across the state since Tropical Storm Irene across different programs. So these are properties that have flood risk or have flooded. They don't have to have flooded in the past. They have to have risk. Or they're at risk from landslides, which we saw a decent number of those in July as well. So we've done several landslide buyouts as well. Did I see a hand? Go ahead. Reptile.
Oh, I didn't mean to have you interrupt you in mid-sentence. So
Oh, no worries. Go for it.
But as depicted here in the photo, you show it obviously it was a fluvial related landslide hazard. And my question to you is how does FEMA make available FEMA dollars or federal dollars for buyouts of properties such as this one where they're at high risk or have been substantially damaged but are outside the special flood hazard area? In this case, it was landslide related where obviously the stream had nibbled away at its toe.
Yes, so if it's a landslide, so this one we actually purchased with our state program, the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, because it was so close to falling in and it was going to take too long for FEMA to get there. So we purchased this one with our state program, but with FEMA funding, yes, we can do landslides. They're required to be at imminent risk of failure, which FEMA defines as within the next 5 years, and they require that we have a letter from the state geologist certifying that it's at risk.
Oh, that's helpful because I knew we set up some state funding to support that, but it was brought to my attention that for some reason, because the Community Resilience Fund did not specify that it could be used for landslide hazards, that you did not have that flexibility, and it's good to hear that you do.
Well, we did in this case because the river was what caused that was caused by a flooding, so it really was that erosion event. There are some landslides in the state that they're FEMA eligible, but they're not eligible under what was the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, because that program required that it be flood related and then have a water quality tie. So they should be eligible on the FEMA side, but they wouldn't have been eligible under the Flood Resilient Communities Fund. This one was because it was flooding related. If that makes sense. Yeah. There's a lot of nuance in all of this. So please ask questions. Definitely stop me if you have them. So that's the high level of buyouts. Following July, we set up an interest intake form, which is a Microsoft form on our website that we sent out broadly. We closed that in January with about 300 responses across the state. So the potential of how many buyouts we will do, I don't think we'll do that many following July, but that was a significant amount of interest, more than we've ever seen before following the July flood. And we're still accepting applications. We just closed that intake tool. But when we did in January, we had 300 responses. We can also fund large floodplain restoration projects. So we've done quite a few of these. I have some examples I can show you after I talk about the funding programs of those types of projects. We can upsize infrastructure, so culverts and bridges, or other road relocation or transportation resiliency improvements. We can do structural elevation projects, which are usually residential, or floodproofing projects for commercial or municipal buildings. We can fund local hazard mitigation plans. So I mentioned our state plan. For our local communities to have access to any of this funding, they're required to have a FEMA-approved local hazard mitigation plan. So we fund those through the program as well, and then other planning and scoping activities. So I'll dig into the grant programs in a second, but any questions on the eligibility piece, the scope of projects that we're talking about? Okay. So these are the big programs that we've been using over the last few years. So this, I'll dig more into two of the FEMA programs. I put the Flood Resilient Communities Fund on here because that has been a mechanism that we've been using over the last couple of years to purchase properties and to do other projects that aren't FEMA eligible, or for whatever reason it wasn't feasible to use FEMA funding, like the landslide I just showed you. So this was created with ARPA funding in 2021, American Rescue Plan Act dollars. So we got a $5 million allocation the first year, and then another 15 the second year. And as of December, we've obligated all of that funding. So there isn't currently any available funding within this program, but seeing if there's potential for a future iteration. And we'll see where that goes. At this point, we've obligated available funding under that program. But it was really created out of that need to fill gaps that we identified following Tropical Storm Irene. The biggest of which is properties that have erosion risk but aren't in the special flood hazard area. And then on the FEMA side, I'll touch quickly on this bottom one, which is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program first. That's an annual program. So there's an allocation for each state, and then we can apply for large competitive projects outside of that allocation. But we've really used that pot every year to apply for local plan updates and for scoping activities. It's the best pot we have to do scoping work most of the time. So developing a project, if we know there's an issue, but we don't know what the solution is, getting the designs, getting all the things put together. And then I'll spend a little more time talking about these two programs. So FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and Flood Mitigation Assistance. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of words here, but I want to have it all up on the screen for you. And then I'll go through some examples of the projects, and that'll be pictures. So FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is funding that follows disasters in the state. So whenever we have a federally declared disaster, we get a certain allocation based on the scale of that disaster under this program. So for context, following Tropical Storm Irene, we had $34 billion available. It looks like we're going to have 75, maybe closer to $90 million available following July. So it's by far the largest pot of this program that we've ever had. Projects require a 25% match. So we currently have some funding for buyouts, although we only have a little bit left. So we're providing the match for buyouts for now until that runs out. But we don't have any additional match funding at this point. We just released the notice of funding a couple weeks ago, and I can drop the link to that in the chat in a minute. But for any of those larger projects, like any of the infrastructure projects or floodplain restoration work, we have a pre-application form that's currently up on the website that's due June 21st. So we're hoping to have people submit projects sooner than that to just give us some basic information so we can figure out what do you have, what do you need, and then help prioritize resources for developing a benefit cost analysis, for example, which you might need for any of those infrastructure projects. So that form is out now and a full notice of funding with it, with the idea that then will help support application development by the end of 2024. So we need to get things in by June so we can support resources to get projects developed. And I mentioned the benefit cost analysis. That's a very specific FEMA program. We have some resources to help with it, but it's how we show FEMA that our projects are cost effective. So it's not required for most buyouts or most residential elevation projects. There's a waiver for those, but it is required for most of those other larger projects. Eligibility is a tricky one occasionally on this program and with this type of group because FEMA does not allow nonprofits or conservation organizations to apply, unfortunately. So we've been working with Karina on a project for a couple of years in Northfield where Karina was supporting the town, but the town ultimately has to be the one that applies for the funding. So it has to be a state agency or some sort of governing entity. The only exception to that is if it's a critical facility that a nonprofit owns, then they might be able to flood proof it or put a generator in for their facility specifically, but not for something like a floodplain restoration or any of those other larger projects. So the best use here is really those implementation projects. We had some scoping funding at the beginning, but FEMA requires if you do scoping under this funding that you have to develop a project in time to submit under the same funding round. So we're not accepting scoping applications anymore, but we are working on a statewide scoping assessment that Vermont Emergency Management applied for at the beginning of the beginning in August, where we'll be working with some of the hardest hit communities to do hydraulic assessments to look at different options that they might have for reducing their flood risk. So the hope is that we'll then create projects that get submitted into this round and supporting our communities with that, the full suite of application development. Okay, questions on this program before I move on to the next one? Yeah, Karina, go ahead.
You spoke, Stephanie, of the need for funding to support the those homes and properties damaged by fluvial erosion versus inundation. And I was just wondering if you have like data on how many different projects are impacted one way versus the other, and if you could speak a little bit more to the difference there.
Yeah, I have the number, it's in a spreadsheet somewhere, so maybe I can send it to you when I follow up. Because we did an assessment to the 300 properties that came in on the intake form. The first thing we did was review all of those to see if they were eligible for FEMA or not based on their location. And the number that's in my head is $16 million that would be needed to do the non-FEMA ones, but I don't remember how many properties that is. But
okay.
I have a spreadsheet I can send you if that's of interest.
That would be super helpful.
That shows the breakdown of what we're looking at. And I think it's people who expressed initial interest. I think we'll see a good amount of attrition in that list, but I think we'll also see when we start working in communities, when people start to see these projects happen, there might be more interest as well.
Thank you.
And we are already submitting projects. There are buyouts in FEMA review already. Yeah, Hillary.
I just had a quick question about the dams. Are there a certain criteria that would apply to dams? Because until they fail, there might not be like your benefit cost analysis. I guess I'm curious about what the criteria would be to make it so a dam might be eligible for these funds.
Yeah, great question. So the project we were working on with Karina was a dam removal. And the biggest hurdle for those is going to be that benefit cost analysis. And the way that we were able to make that one work is by not just removing the dam, but also restoring some floodplain below the dam. So it's opening up the river a little bit more, giving it some more space, conserving that land. And that made the benefit cost analysis work. So we, instead of just remove the structure, we expanded the project scope a little bit. And that was what got us there. So if it's paired with the restoration projects tend to have really high benefit cost analyses. So if it's together, that it counts towards the removal, if that makes sense. Or it could be based on a failure and what the impact would be of it failing and what type of event, like how much flooding do we think it would take for the dam to fail and what the impact would be. That's another option. All right. I'll hit on one more program here and then I'll show you some examples of projects to get you guys thinking. So flood mitigation assistance, this might be a little less relevant to this group, but it's a relatively new FEMA program, the Swift Current version of flood mitigation assistance. The Swift Current flood mitigation assistance is one of FEMA's annual programs. Swift Current is specifically for states that have open disaster declarations. So last fall, there was an announcement from FEMA of $300 million available across the country. 40 million of that is available for Vermont specifically. It's what's eligible is pretty narrow compared to the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So right now we're trying to figure out which projects could be eligible here, but they have to be properties that the projects have to reduce risks in National Flood Insurance Pool. That's how the program is funded. So they have to have flood insurance from FEMA, and they have to be rep loss, severe rep loss, or substantially damaged properties from July. So most of what we'll do with this pot is elevations of residential properties or property buyouts that happen to be eligible. So it's a subset of what's eligible under that Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, but the timeline is a lot faster. All right, so another 41 potentially available. All right, then I'll talk through a couple of projects just so you can see the types of things we've been doing. So Northfield, the dam we were just talking about with Karina is down here. That'll be another project that lowers flood elevations in the neighborhood up here that I'm about to show you. But this is an area where, following Tropical Storm Irene, Michelle Braun was working for the town. She's, for those who know her, she's amazing and helped put in all of these applications, get all of this work done to do buyouts. So each of these black numbers was an address where we did a property buyout. And then they were able to secure other funding to do restoration work. So removing fill that had been added over time. Most of this section is in the floodway, so it's an even higher risk area. It's really where the river wants to be. And they were able to put in this beautiful community park. So now most of the time, it's a nice asset to the community. This park with walking trails, it gives them river access. But then in July, it was able to fill up with water and lower flood elevations in the surrounding neighborhood. So that's the sort of thing that we can do one-off buyouts, but we like to see projects like this where it's going to have a bigger impact. It's going to reduce risk more broadly. The buyouts are voluntary, so there's a couple of spots in here where there were property owners that were not interested. And one of those is now interested, and we'll be doing it hopefully through the July funding pot. But it's voluntary for the property owners, it's voluntary for the community. So we have some scenarios where property owners don't want to do buyouts, but we also have scenarios where communities don't want to do buyouts. And then restoration projects. Yeah, Mark, do you want to jump in on that before we move on? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. So my first question was the whites I assumed were non-buyout parcels. And
Yes.
but I just wonder practically what happens. So with those two parcels sort of bookending the Dog River Park, I guess two questions. Flood insurance mapping, does that change how those structures and those existing landholders can or would ever get flood insurance? And does that impact the possibilities or negotiations for acquisitions and buyouts? And second, like practically from an environmental perspective, what happens with the restoration? How much does that hinder the opportunities for restoration because you still have those homes and structures there?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second question, and then if I forget the first one, remind me. But I'm not a hydrologist. I'm a planner and a project manager. But it's a large enough site that it still had a significant impact. I think the trick is if we just buy this parcel, there's not really anything we can do. If we just buy this one and this one, maybe there's not as much we can do, but this is a fairly large area, so it was still worth it. And they also did restoration on this site and then down this way as well. So it was enough fill removal. I think it could have potentially been more if they'd gotten those two sites, but that's the scenario we end up in with voluntary buyouts. And then the first question was around how it updates the map. So us doing this project, giving the river some more space, lowering flood elevations, doesn't automatically trigger anything in terms of FEMA updating their maps. But these property owners could do a letter of map revision with FEMA. They could pay for FEMA to update the map to take this into account. And if they were no longer in the special flood hazard area, then not be required to have flood insurance. So that's a potential, but it's not, FEMA doesn't automatically update the maps. when we do this type of project. If that makes sense. Is that what you were getting at, Mark?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I know that maps are being updated. Cree mentioned at the start when she introduced herself that they're working with, and the state was working with Lincoln to work on some of that. I know that up here in South Hero, we're still working as far as zoning's concerned with, 1969 or 71 maps, and we all know that that's totally irrelevant, and so limiting as we're trying to work on shoreland issues. So I just wondered whether there was a mechanism that in scenarios like this, it accelerates it automatically rather than to have go through the payment process where, citizens advance that. So thanks.
Yeah, it doesn't, unfortunately. It would have to be individual, although a lot of the state is going through map updates now. So some of these big projects that we did following Irene that I'm showing you, as those maps are updated, it will incorporate that data. But as anyone who knows FEMA and mapping and what that looks like, it takes them a very long time to get through that process. So restoration projects, this is an area, this is Brattleboro. So it's the whetstone coming in and opening up into Lake Champlain. We were able, so following Tropical Storm Irene, to identify 2 large sites. So this Melrose Terrace site was senior housing owned by Brattleboro Housing Authority. The residents had been evacuated a few times. It was a pretty unsafe place to be in high water. And so those residents, they were secured other funding to relocate residents. And then we were able to do a very large floodplain restoration project there. And then this 250 Burge site, this is almost complete. There's some planting that needs to be done in the spring, but the majority of work there is done in the fall. And these are the types of projects that we're going to be looking for through this Hazard Mitigation Grant Program round that we have open. It's the incremental projects where we can look at a large site, reduce fill, slow the river down, give it space before it gets into our communities like Brattleboro, where the river's a lot more incised. So those are two big examples of that type of work. And this is Melrose right after we finished, right after the plantings were done. And so we finished up in 2022 in the summer, getting all the plantings in, and then there was a flood in December of that year. Most of the state, it was a utility disaster, but in Brattleboro it flooded. And you can see from the snow line where the water was, that's where all of those structures were. This is their Brattleboro Housing Authority, still has their office building here. The water didn't get that high, but it worked as designed, and it's worked as designed a couple of times. There's also this not little actually, it's pretty big, this overflow culvert here too, that adds to the impact of reduced risk and protecting the surrounding neighborhood. And then another cool project that we've been talking about a lot is this overflow culvert in Brandon. So for those who are familiar with what happened during Tropical Storm Irene, Brandon was hit very hard. So we'll just show these coming down this way, and then it went straight through downtown, straight across here. Normally it would go around a little bit downtown, but when flows are high, it goes straight through. So we were able to put in this rather large overflow culvert. Most of the year, it looks like this. There's no water in it. But then during a high flow event, the water can go underneath the community instead of over it. So it's another opportunity that we're looking at where it leaves the river. There's some things in the river at the bottom, but it leaves a lot of the river where it is. Doesn't try to degrade the natural course of it, but gives it an extra space and leaves it. And I think this is my last example. So this is a trail bridge in Cambridge that used to look like this. You can see the abutments poking into the river. And we were able to put in this significantly larger span for this recreational trail bridge and remove fill. So a floodplain restoration project underneath as well. The river has access multiple times since we finished this project several years ago. So again, all of these incremental flood reduction approaches, we're looking at how can we lower elevations. And then there was a prompt about gaps. So for what it's worth, there's a few things I've been thinking about quite a lot. One is our Flood Resilient Communities Fund program and not having additional funding there. Trying to figure out how we can continue to fund projects that don't fit the little FEMA boxes quite perfectly. And then match funding is another piece that's making me and my team pretty nervous right now. We have just under 2 million left for buyouts that's not obligated, but we're continuing to work with communities to put together buyout applications, and that's going pretty quickly. So we don't currently have additional match for buyouts, and we're not able to match any of the other projects as well. So I would say that's a gap that we're certainly thinking about. And then on the just other challenges piece, the two biggest things that I'm seeing right now, just being in towns and talking them through buyouts or any of these other projects, is this need to figure out how to maintain housing, how to keep housing where it is, where we can, supporting communities and figuring out whether there are specific areas that they could do a series of buyouts and a restoration project that allows them to prevent buyouts somewhere else. What does that look like? And then we're seeing a lot of gaps between individual assistance for FEMA, which is the immediate individual support that comes in following the event, following a flooding event, and then the time it takes to actually get a buyout awarded by FEMA and implemented. There's a gap between those two things that I think a lot of the state is feeling pretty significantly. So those are the things I've been thinking about in this. But I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Stephanie, this is Hillary. I have a quick question. The Cambridge Trail Bridge replacement, did you say that was the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funds?
Yes, it was. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
That was from the Irene, a large part of Irene funding. All right, any other questions? Last call.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Absolutely.
And your email was on that slide deck, so if anybody wants to follow up after.
Right, and I'll put the website in the chat, and I can put my email in the chat as well.
Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind just sending me those slides, I can share them with the meeting follow materials.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, and so now are we switching to Laura's presentation, Katie? Lapierre.
Yep, if there are no other questions for Stephanie. And I'll make Laura a co-host so she can share her screen.
So she's Wetlands Program Manager from the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, and she's here to talk about the role of wetlands in supporting climate resilience.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having me today. I love talking about wetlands, and this is, certainly one of the reasons that we are issued with protecting, restoring, and managing our wetlands throughout the state of Vermont. So I am going to take a second to set up this presentation. And sort everything out on my screen. And you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, great. So wetlands certainly provide for climate resilience. You have this image of a wetland stream side slowing down water flow when it goes over the banks, holding the waters, holding sediments and such. Those larger wetlands certainly providing for flood storage. And then we also have wetlands that are more vulnerable to climate change, that may have certain species that are the southern extent of their range and such. And so we have a bit of both going on with wetlands, where the habitats that we want to protect in the state of Vermont that need refugia as species move north, but also have the ecosystem services to help us be more resilient within Vermont and across the globe. So here I will be presenting mostly about just what our program does, how we're maintaining, restoring, and protecting our wetlands for the various ecosystem services that they provide. So quick outline, I'm going to give an overview about wetlands, their functions and values, how the wetlands program works, what we do, what we don't do, and then give you some specifics on the various projects and tasks that we're working on, such as updating wetland mapping, our outreach efforts, monitoring and assessment of wetlands throughout the state, restoration efforts for wetlands, and how our regulations work. Feel free to raise your hand if you have questions, and I can stop throughout the presentation. So the real basics, wetlands are where land and water meet. So they're very diverse. You can have a wetland area that is flooded throughout the year, but you can also have wetlands that are only saturated soils for 2 weeks in the growing season. So they might not look like wetlands out in August, but they are still providing ecosystem services. So here's an image of some of the different types of wetlands that we have throughout Vermont. Our vernal pools, our floodplain forests, our peatlands are all a part of the array of wetland types. And then we also have these other wetland areas, which, in areas of Vermont that may be more developed, you know them as the areas that don't get mowed because they're too soggy. Those are providing habitat and are storing floodwaters and such as well. So we're protecting the whole array of wetland types based off of their functions and values. And our statute requires us to protect wetlands for these 10 specific functions and values. So if a wetland provides one or more of these functions or values to a significant level, the state finds it's worthy of protection. And so we protect them through our regulatory process, which I'll go over towards the end of my presentation. And it's really important to have regulations because in Vermont, we've historically lost 35% of our wetland area. In the Lake Champlain Basin, it's closer to 50%. That was lost during, colonial years between 1700s and 1980. That's where those estimates come from. Approximately 4% of Vermont is wetland today, which is interesting because these are the areas that are providing so much more ecosystem services than other land bases in Vermont. For example, peatlands globally store 30% of land-based carbon in the world. So, certainly providing for that carbon sequestration more than other areas. And over 50% of Vermont plant species are found in wetlands, and over 40% of rare, threatened, and endangered species in the United States rely on wetlands for survival. So these are concentrated areas of services for the people of Vermont, and that's why we're here with our little wetlands program. Flood and stormwater storage is one of the big functions of wetlands. You can imagine these are many times bowl-shaped areas in the landscape that can receive and hold waters for longer than sloping or flat areas of the state. And with the diverse vegetation can really absorb these floodwaters and reduce the velocity of flow heading downstream. So by holding onto these waters for a while, this really minimizes damages to properties, roads, culverts, bridges, and such. And this study here was done after Tropical Storm Irene, which found that the average yearly savings of wetland and floodplains for the town of Middlebury was between $126,000 to $450,000 per year. And the dark areas here is all wetlands. Many have been restored and such. And in upstream of Rutland, there are a lot less floodplain and wetlands there. So they received more damages from Irene and this July flood. And this is shown again in this hydrograph from last July, where you see in Rutland, the discharge of waters really spiked because there weren't low-lying areas holding the floodwaters like depicted in this picture here, which is at 3 Mile Bridge in Middlebury at the confluence of Middlebury River. This is a site that has been undergoing restoration with Ducks Unlimited. It was funded by some of our wetland restoration funds for projects that impacted and filled wetlands. Ducks Unlimited helps us restore and create wetlands on the landscape to mitigate for those changes from permits. So you can see here that Middlebury did not have the spike in water flow as in Rutland did. And it's because of situations like this at the 3 Mile Bridge site. So here's our small team of folks in the wetlands program. Maybe you know some of us, we're a small state. We primarily work on identifying wetland locations with maps and individual site visits for landowners and developers. We do a lot of outreach about wetlands. Basically, when people are thinking about doing a project that involves earth disturbance, they contact us and we help them through permitting process and trying to avoid these valuable resources. We also assess the health of wetlands through monitoring efforts. We support voluntary restoration, and we implement the Vermont wetland rules, which have been in place since 1990, where we review project plans, we require wetland avoidance wherever it's possible, and we ensure no net loss of wetland function or value through the permitting program. I'll mention that we're not a grant program. We do review projects, we do coordinate with restoration partners and such, but we don't have our own specific grants program. We work with others within the department and the agency for that sort of work. Okay, so on to our specific projects. So this is a real big one for us. We've been working with maps that under-detect wetlands for a very long time, and people in the state of Vermont want maps to do planning and to identify where the resources are. And people have been getting a bit of a false sense of security looking at the maps and saying, my site doesn't have wetlands, I'm good to go and develop. But that's not the case. A lot of our maps were created before most people were doing email, so it's been around for a long time, and technology has vastly improved. So we are working first with the Environmental Protection Agency, who's provided us with funding to start this project, where we need to meet the National Wetlands Inventory standards, where our mapping will go onto the federal map. So we're working with consultants who understand their data requirements and have mapped wetlands in almost every state in the nation. So they're very well qualified and they've been great to work with. And here I'm showing when the National Wetlands Inventory work will be completed throughout the different watersheds in the state. We've already completed the Missisquoi River Basin area, which was 603 square miles of area. By the end of this year, I'm excited to say that about 80% of our mapping will be completed. And that work will be going on to the National Wetlands Inventory. And from there, we will be filtering the mapping to which wetlands the state considers significant based off of the list in the rules on the characteristics. And we're going to add those to the state mapping so that it's a lot clearer for folks where these wetlands are to help them with project planning, both development, avoiding wetlands, as well as restoration partners knowing where there are existing wetlands. We also update the wetlands map through permit-related actions. So you can imagine as permit applications are coming in, many of these wetlands that are protected aren't mapped. And when we receive the permit application, we work to put the wetlands on the map. Here you see this is a utility corridor project, where in the blue, those are additions that are currently up now on public notice. I can provide the link in the chat when I'm done presenting if you're curious and want to look at this area, because there's over 250 individual wetland changes that's happening. And we've been doing this method of updates through permitting for quite a while, but it takes a really long time, as you can imagine. So having this statewide effort taking place for the National Wetlands Inventory is a whole lot faster and will get us results much quicker. And better maps means better models. So I'll be going into a couple of models that the state is using. And, you know, if we want to be able to estimate carbon sequestration or where there are good places for wetland restoration or wetland conservation, if we're using a base layer that is poor quality mapping, then we're not getting good numbers for estimates of what wetlands are doing in the state and what we could be protecting better or restoring. So we're really excited. This is really the baseline of wetland protection, is just knowing where they are. And what we're doing with this as we get updated maps is we're going to be predicting wetland function based off of these maps. So here's a whole lot of acronym soup here, sorry, but it shows the various codes that are used for understanding whether it's a lakeside wetland, if it's a seep that's the start of a stream and such. This is really important information, and we are getting these codes, which is called the National Wetlands Inventory Plus, where we're adding information about the landscape position, landform, water flow path, and water body type. And having that additional information allows us to be able to infer what functions and values might be occurring in that wetland, in that portion of the landscape in Vermont. And I see Representative Dolan has a question. Hi.
Hi, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm interrupting, I guess. This is great information and great work, and I really appreciate all the effort has gone into this. My question is in regards to the funding. I know that the legislature has supported your wetland mapping over the last couple of years anyway, to make sure we have statewide mapping. I mean, this kind of information is important for everybody, for landowners, for developers, for people interested in wild places and nature-based solutions for flood resilience. So all this information is so important for everybody, really. So my question is, am I accurate to say that you're set for the match relating to the EPA funding that you're receiving to finish the mapping for the state?
Yes, we are. We have some state dollars that's helping us complete the state and also have ongoing maintenance of the mapping, which is really great. Hi, Breck.
Thank you.
Laura, how you doing?
Good.
As long as we're taking a pause here, I was going to ask a question later, but I'll insert it here. Has your office been affected by the Supreme Court decision last year, the Sackett versus EPA on waters of the United States? And in particular, I'm kind of interested in whether that's influencing your interactions with EPA on things like this mapping of these disconnected wetlands.
Great question. I was wondering if someone was going to bring up Sackett. Thank you. We have separate jurisdiction from federal jurisdiction, which is great as they keep flip-flopping which wetlands are protected, aren't protected. We know we're protecting our wetlands that have significant functions and values. We do partner a lot with the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA to reach our wetland protection goals. So, you know, we're still working with them. They lead our compensatory mitigation program, but we're able to have project proponents individually put monies in just for state type projects. So that means that there will still be compensation projects happening throughout Vermont that may not be wetlands that are federally jurisdictional. So I'd say we're one of the lucky states in that we have our own separate regulation and we're able to protect wetlands for the various functions that they have and not just whether they're connected to navigable waters, which is what the Sackett decision is about.
Could I just drill down just a little bit further on that? So I'm presuming that, you know, the state can be more restrictive, not less restrictive than the federal regulation. But is that influencing the amount of funding that we can get from federal sources to match with, if not capital M match, you know, little m match with funding that's available to the state, from the state?
Yeah, so typically the EPA has funding specifically for wetland programs. It's called the Wetland Program Development Grants. It's been the amount of funding for that year to year has flatlined for over 10 years. So it's in effect shrinking because of inflation. We've been really successful. So these are competitive grants, actually. So we're having to compete with other states for dollars for wetland protection, which, you know, we we work with one another and such. But since it is competitive, we're not sure how, how well we'll fare every 2 years for getting funding. I know that there's some discussion nationally about increasing the funding amount and also making it a standard amount that goes to the states because of the Sackett decision, putting more onus on the states for protecting our wetlands. That's one of the ways people are trying to ensure that the non-federal waters are still protected.
Great. That sounds like a real challenge. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Great.
Yes, thanks, Laura. I guess I needed some clarification. You know, the land trusts across the state that are involved with conservation of, sometimes thousands of acres. And when they refine wetland maps, I'm assuming that goes to you with your wetlands program mapping. I mean, how does that coordinate? And do you coordinate with the University of Vermont Gun Institute? It was their graduate student did that work on Otter Creek that really forecast and was able to mitigate, talk about mitigation of storm surge in village of Middlebury. So the question is about coordination and who shares data.
Yeah, well, in more recent years, we have been coordinating more with the University of Vermont. There's a couple of projects that they're doing that is related to wetlands in floodplains. And we've been going out to the same sites. We have a good team of botanists. So what we're able to bring to the table is, good vegetation information that then can be coupled with their sediment attenuation data and soils data. So that's working quite well. Our restoration partners haven't been providing wetland mapping. And I think that's okay right now because we do have this larger effort to get statewide mapping done. And that might be a good source to look at for the future because the National Wetlands Inventory is still a broad scale because it's landscape wide. But wherever we can get information that's more detailed, that's more site specific, if somebody has that data, we can be adding it to the mapping. And once we have this statewide map completed, we can really dive into a bit further who else is doing mapping and where are we able to get that information to refine the maps even further. So those are good questions.
Yeah, the Trust for Public Land, for instance, I forget the name of the very large wetland, 5,000 acres they're preserving near Elmore Mountain. And of course, they deliver land over to the feds. So that, I'm curious about that kind of coordination. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I imagine that that wetland is mapped to some extent, but the broader edges that might be more cryptic because they're within forested areas may not be on there. Thanks. Yeah, so back for one of the tools of the mapping is predicting wetland function. And you see we've been able to get the first of many reports. So as we get the wetland mapping updated, our contractors are looking at the various National Wetlands Inventory codes and the plus codes, the landscape and landform codes, in order to predict what functions and values are on the landscape. And here's our draft one for the Missisquoi Basin because that wetland mapping is completed. And you see that over half or about half of the wetlands within that watershed are probably really important for carbon sequestration. So this is a good tool for us to, in general, understand how wetlands in various watersheds are acting on the landscape, but also help us have more digestible information for the public to understand the wetlands in their backyards. So these reports are going to be put out on our program. There's going to be an interactive map towards the end of this project, and this will all be finished by 2027, which, you know, it has to follow after the wetland mapping is completed. Another way that we're using the wetland mapping, that we're currently using the mapping that we have, is using a wetland screening tool. As you can imagine, our ANR atlas that we have has a lot of different layers on it, lots of different symbologies and such, and not everybody is savvy working with that sort of thing. So we've created a screening tool where people can just type in their address or their SPAN number and get information on how likely there is a wetland on their site. And each of these layers, hydric soils, advisory maps, and such, you can expand on that and learn about it so you can better understand how much wetland is on your property, and of course, who from the wetlands program you can call. We've expanded on this a bit because we've been running into more issues of people purchasing land sight unseen in Vermont. I think there's a bit of a rush during COVID for people wanting to come and live in Vermont. People purchasing land because, you know, the houses weren't affordable, or they couldn't find other housing, so they decided they wanted to build. And in some cases, people were purchasing wetland lots, essentially swamp lots is what we're calling them. And these areas don't perk for septic, and really aren't good places to put your home. They might flood regularly and such. So we have this tool that we've done a bit of outreach about, so that people can know, going through the screening tool, if the lot that they're considering purchasing is swamp and maybe not as developable as they thought. And then we have a couple of documents on, you know, what you can do with a swamp lot. You can hunt on your swamp lot. You can hike on your swamp lot. Maybe you want to join with a conservation organization to conserve it. And of course, you can always sell. So this is some of the information coming out of the mapping. This will be more refined as the newer maps come aboard. And one slide here for our outreach efforts. So, you know, it's not all on the individual, on the landowner. The realtors really should be telling people if a site is a wetland lot. So we've partnered with Sea Grant to have an accredited realtor course. We have some good outreach materials, and most recently, maybe you saw on Facebook this ad, we're working with a media group to put out better outreach about our wetland map updates, and also how you need to check for wetlands before you build. So that material will be coming out this July, which is part of an effort for mapping the Connecticut basin. Actually, the Long Island Sound Partnership provided us with funding so we could do the mapping as well as outreach, which is applicable throughout the state, but we do have a focus on the Connecticut basin. So another piece of work that we do, like I was mentioning, is biomonitoring. And we do it at 3 separate scales. Level 1 is kind of our desktop review that we do. Level 2 is more rapid assessment, where we get a bit more information, maybe about invasive plants, about past historical impacts and such, and we get scores for those wetlands. Because there's just so many throughout the state that we don't have enough time to do the level 3 detailed assessment on all of our wetlands in Vermont. We get to around 30 to 50 different wetlands a year for level 3, and with over 300,000 acres of wetlands in the state of Vermont, you can imagine that that's, you know, a bit of a drop in the bucket, which is why we need to do more of the mapping and rapid assessment work as well. So, you know, we're certainly contemplating climate change with our monitoring of wetlands. And here's a few ways that we're integrating climate resilience in with our biomonitoring. We might be monitoring wetlands that would be more affected by extreme weather impacts, these wetlands that are associated with flashy streams, seeps, floodplains, and such. We want to look at the marginally wet communities. So those are things like our clay plain forests and seepages, and dynamic systems like beaver wetlands, to understand how changes in precipitation and such changes the extent of those wetlands. They may be growing, they may be shrinking, depending on what's happening with the climate and local conditions. We would also want to find reference condition wetlands where there aren't other factors other than potentially climate change affecting those wetlands. So we would be looking for wetlands that are far from any roads and any development for doing long-term surveys of those areas. We want to focus on those ecosystem types that are at the northern or southern extent of their range, so we can see how these species, these wetland species, are changing throughout the landscape over time. Are we getting more black gum swamps? That's something that's more of a southern species. It's the northern extent of its range right now. Maybe we'll be getting more of those versus our black spruce bogs that are at the southern extent and maybe working their way into Canada over time. We also want to understand how peatlands are responding to climate change. They are sequestering carbon, but if we have a lot of droughts where they're drying out, they might be releasing carbon and such. So we want to be able to be assessing that, along with just understanding how wetland health is doing throughout the various basins in the state. Okay, so to wetland restoration. So we do have a program within our program helping partners connect with landowners and with each other for restoring wetlands. We have an incentive program working with NRCS. Their Wetland Reserve Easement Program has been a very successful program in restoring wetlands in Vermont, especially along the Otter Creek. And we help in DC by providing incentive payments for those projects to go forward, just a little bit more funding in order for a landowner to say, yes, I want an easement and I want this to be converted back to wetland. So working with voluntary landowners. So we have this restoration model was originally created in 2007. We updated it in 2017, and it is highlighting those areas that would be attenuating the most phosphorus. So helping with clean water projects throughout the basin. It's only within the Lake Champlain Basin, and it's using the best available information that we had at the time. And you see here, it's fairly rough, just kind of showing this area in St. Albans along Rug Brook that has a score of 3.3, which on a score of 0 to 4, this is highly ranking for holding phosphorus. So it might be a good site to do a wetland restoration project. You can see these maps on our on the ANR Atlas. You can click on the wetland restoration layer and see that information. And this has been used to help many partners find potential wetland restoration projects. As we update the mapping, we'll be wanting to update this, and my hope is that we'll be able to do it statewide and also look at factors beyond phosphorus attenuation. Wetlands with their many functions and values and ecosystem services. We probably should be looking to see what are our priorities for climate resilience, for example. It probably pairs well with phosphorus attenuation, but it would be good to, know based off of who's looking to restore. They might have the different priorities, and certainly climate resilience and clean water is a priority for the state. So moving on to our regulatory arm, which is the bulk of the work that we do in the state. So I was saying before, we protect wetlands with significant functions and values, and we parse them out with this classification system. Class 1 wetlands, they go through rulemaking. They're specifically listed in our rules as exceptional wetlands that can't be impacted unless there is a compelling need for public health and safety. So those are pretty much off-limit wetlands because they can't be replicated elsewhere. When they're gone, they're gone. So we want to protect those as class 1. Class 2 wetlands is the majority of the wetlands in the state. They have one or more significant functions and values. The class 1 and class 2 wetlands, they both get protected buffer zones. Class 2 wetlands have an automatic 50-foot, and class 1s receive a 100-foot buffer zone unless it's determined otherwise. We have a class 1 wetland that has as large as a 400-foot buffer zone, and that's to protect the exemplary functions of the wetland. You can do a lot of things to a wetland without ever getting into the wetland. You can, clear the forest and reduce wildlife habitat as one example. We only issue permits for activities in wetlands. So this is our overarching regulatory framework is if you're doing an activity in a wetland or buffer zone, you need a permit unless it's specifically called out as something that doesn't. So we're only issuing permits if you really have to impact that wetland in order to meet your project purpose. So we spend a lot of time talking with project proponents on whether they can have a smaller driveway, move it over there, maybe not have that 2-car garage, just a 1-car garage, etc. And we're making sure that what activities do take place does not adversely affect the functions and values. If there are effects on functions and values, they need to pay for folks like Ducks Unlimited to create wetlands in other places in Vermont. So this is the bulk of the work that we do. We have 7 review staff. Our amount of permits has increased to over 200 a year, and we review over 1,000 projects a year amongst the 7 folks. So it keeps us quite busy. Here's an image of the projects that we permitted and the projects that we reviewed between 2016 and 2020. You can see that a large area densest areas around Chittenden County. As you can imagine, that's where the most development activity is happening. And some more information about impacts to wetlands for that time period was primarily, I think it's the first three watersheds, Lake Memphremagog, Northern Lake Champlain, and the Otter Creek, were received over 50% of the permitted impact approval. So it's varies quite a bit throughout the state. And then we also track wetland losses by watershed, and you can see the same three regions had the most wetland loss. But we're also, wanting to see wetlands restored. We have a no net loss goal. And if you look at our most recent annual report for 2022, we are seeing actually a net gain in wetland area. So in 2022, we had reporting coming back from permittees that over 2.5 acres of wetland was filled and over 5.2 acres of wetland was enhanced or restored. And you can see losses and gains aren't equal throughout the specific counties in the state. 7 counties received more wetland gain than loss. That's Chittenden, Franklin, Rutland, Washington, and Windham County. And this varies from year to year. For the 2016 to 2020 report, we had a net gain of over 18 acres. Also, with our permitting, we do wetland investigations. We look at violations and we work towards voluntary compliance. We're averaging over 200 investigations a year, working with our enforcement division. More than half of them are found to not be a violation, but you can see that we're closing less than complaints received. So that's something that our program is really focusing on to ensure that we're reviewing complaints in a timely fashion and getting restoration. It can be a lot of work. It can take a year or so for an individual to work on a restoration plan with us and get the timing to do the restoration work within the growing season. Depending on when you found out about the violation, it might take the next growing season to do the work. So this is one of the aspects of the program and why we really want to focus on outreach and mapping so that we have less inadvertent violations, so we can focus on the more flagrant violations and making sure that we have no net loss. And on a nicer note, we have gained some muscle memory on Class 1 protections. This is a photo of Eshqua Bog, which you should check out around Father's Day for the orchids. They're beautiful. And it's a very popular place in Heartland that has this nice fen that is very much loved by the orchid community and many folks. And this now has received Class 1 protection. Interestingly, this was not on the wetlands map before it was petitioned. So it goes to show that there's some really valuable wetlands that haven't been identified. So the basin plans includes lists of wetlands that have high potential for Class 1 status. There's close to 50 of them. Right now we have around 12 wetlands that are actually Class 1. And working on outreach with the landowners and such can be a lot of work for our small team. And partnering with groups who petition for Class 1 wetlands has been helpful for us to highlight these wetland types and ensure that they're protected into the future. So, you know, that was my presentation, and I'll leave you with this beautiful wetland photo and just say that for climate resilience and wetlands, the gaps that we are seeing is, you know, really basic. Not everyone thinks to look for a wetland. We need better outreach on wetland protections so people aren't inadvertently or intentionally bulldozing our wetland resources. We need to continue to improve our maps, which we are, you know, on track to have a vast improvement in the coming years. And we need to improve our restoration model so that it more clearly reflects what's on the ground and is more efficient for our partners to find wetland restoration sites. And, you know, have parameters for climate resilience priorities as well, so we can be looking and targeting those sites. Thank you. I'll stop there. Hi, Brick.
Hey, Laura, it's just terrific to see how your office is so data driven here. You don't need to go back to the slide, but I am just a little bit curious about the graph that you showed of wetland, the lower graph that you showed of wetland loss by watershed. I didn't see the units on that. Was that in acres, in square feet, in percentages? What was that?
Well, we normally track things by square feet because every square foot counts, but let me look.
That lower graph there. I mean, my question is, if you did express that on a percentage of the wetland that was present already, you know, how would that change this graph?
Yeah, that would, you know, we're not looking at entire wetland destruction with any of these permits. You know, that's a really good point, is, you know, this is each of these are little cuts along the fringe of wetlands. It's very rare that we have a project that impacts the majority of the wetland. We aren't able to get percentages of wetland lost because a lot of these wetlands don't know property boundaries. They extend sometimes for miles, and the information that we get from consultants is a small sliver. So, but I do think that is an important point for our reporting, is that this is the loss, but it's not that, you know, a 12-acre wetland was totally annihilated in northern Lake Champlain. This is acres, but that out of the 200 permits, say, that happened there were small nicks to those wetlands, because ultimately we're looking at having no adverse effects on functions and values, and you're definitely going to have an effect if you're impacting the majority of the wetland.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Thoughts on climate resilience and wetlands? The dog has something to say.
Sorry, that was my dog. Laura, I did want to say what a wonderful presentation that was. I learned so much, and I just think I don't know how you bring this out to more groups, but that was really impressive. So appreciate your just you taking the time and doing all this work. It was great. Thank you. I am curious. Did you say there's 7 wetland staff that are reviewing 1,000 applications a year?
It's over 200 applications, but they do an incredible job talking people out of wetlands. So they are reviewing over 1,000 projects, and only about 200 of those end up with a permit needed.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. I think Karina, you put your hand up first.
I think Hillary did, but I'll be quick. This was another slide question. Back to the map that shows the different areas that are going to be mapped in the different timeframes. There's a number by the Lamoille that I just wanted to know what that number meant. And Laura, thank you so much for this presentation. It was really, really helpful. So yeah, in the little green box, it says 233. Is that acres for
Square miles?
Square miles. Okay. I just wasn't sure if that was consistent. And then I noticed also in the Missisquoi, the slide on the Missisquoi Basin functions as it relates. Yes, that one. Those functions are those aligned with the Vermont wetlands functions? The language is a little different, so I just wasn't sure if it was like a subset or how those functions align with the Vermont wetlands functions.
Yeah, so a lot of nest into wetland functions. So surface water detention and sediment and particulate retention that can look towards water quality function, and then stream flow maintenance, flood storage, and such, and fish habitat. You get the idea.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that in our report, we're going to want to do some sort of a crosswalk with the functions and values that are in our statute so people can understand where they fit in. These are specifically called out because our consultants are using a methodology that's been tested in many states, and it was actually first developed with a bunch of New England experts getting together. So it's used nationally, but has been really catered for New England, and Connecticut has done this for their entire state, if you're curious to see what the results might look like in the end.
Oh, cool. Thank you. And I really appreciate your comment about including parameters for climate resilience moving forward. So thank you for saying that.
Hillary.
Yeah, and I think my question then is maybe related a little bit to like the 800 projects that get reviewed but aren't permitted necessarily. So some of those projects might be like stormwater projects or buffer plantings or, like natural resource projects. Do the impacts to wetlands, if it's a stormwater project right next to a wetland, or the like improvements, if say it's a buffer planting in a wetland buffer or something, do those get sort of counted too, or maybe they get counted through another mechanism, like through the grant funding mechanism? But I was kind of curious if those pieces, are counted too, like outside of the direct permit process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mentioned extremely briefly that our permitting is for activities in wetlands unless it's specifically listed in our rules as an allowed use. So wetland restoration is one that's considered an allowed use. So it's something that we review, but we would never need a permit. So it would never show up on our permit list unless they're doing some sort of infrastructure along with the restoration work. So buffer plantings isn't anything that requires a permit or is tallied as wetland loss. We love buffer plantings. for wetland restoration. For stormwater projects, there are several stormwater projects a year that come in for impacts. Primarily, we're seeing them within the buffer zone, and it's interesting. It's an interesting play. We, you know, certainly want areas that never had good stormwater treatment to have stormwater treatment. And in the end, the remaining places are the wetlands that have been functioning as the stormwater treatment when there was none. And, you know, putting in systems can help improve the water quality reaching the wetland and help enhance those wetlands as well. But we do, you know, there isn't good data on exactly how many pounds of phosphorus an acre of wetland does versus an acre of stormwater treatment practice. We're hoping to get more of that information to help with comparing apples to apples. But in general, if the wetland is providing these services and then you fill in that wetland with a berm for a stormwater pond, you're actually losing some of that water quality service from the wetland. And so is 1 minus 1 equaling 2? It's, you know, that's one thing that we're really sensitive to, and we want to make sure that this hard infrastructure isn't inhibiting our natural ecosystem services when there's other options. So there might be some cases where we're talking with folks about, can you put this in the existing parking lot, or can you do some sort of stormwater offset? And we do work with the stormwater program to try to work on that flexibility so that people are able to meet their stormwater requirements, but also protect the wetland resources to the greatest extent that's really possible out there, understanding that these built landscapes are a bit of a tricky spot. Any other questions?
Laura, I think, oh, go, were you going to say something, Hillary?
This is Brack. I do have a question, but I see we're over time.
We can be quick on the remaining items. You can ask your question.
You can ask it. Go ahead.
So, Laura, I am just curious about, when you think about needs or gaps or, what kind of keeps you up at night about the kind of the near-term future, maybe? Not. Do you have some thoughts about that?
For the near term, for our program, we're pretty maxed out on permit review. Just a few years ago, we had a little over 100 permits coming in. So with similar staffing levels, that's been difficult to keep up with and have as rigorous of a program, which, it's coming down to, we're not collecting as much data about our permits as we were in the past, so we can focus on no net loss and make sure we're keeping true to those goals. So that's a pressure within the program. We're hoping that better mapping can really help with that, but I see this as being like an upswing in outreach needed and potentially more people coming in for wetland review than they did before, because now they know about it. So those are some of the things that keep me up at night.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep. And I can certainly stay on and put a couple of links in the chat that I think I promised while I was presenting, and I can also include my email address. So if anybody wants to do any further follow-up, I'd be happy to do that.
That would be great, Laura. My question was going to be similar to Breck, so appreciate. It was really going to be we act as an advisory advocacy group to the citizens legislator on behalf of Lake Champlain. And so my question was going to be along similar lines. If there's anything that you think that we should be thinking about as we develop our action plan for 2025, that would include asking for or thinking about things that would help improve the Vermont Wetlands Program. We'd love to be a partner with you. So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I think our next thing on the agenda is an update on the recruitment.
Yeah. So, Cree?
I'm leaving.
Okay.
Oh,
Thanks for joining us.
thanks,
It's just so
Cree.
interesting. Thanks so much. Bye.
See you at the next meeting, hopefully. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
So as of February 29th, which was the last day that we were accepting applications, we had 5 folks come in for the 1 remaining seat on the committee. I think the next step that Denise and I discussed was pulling together a nominating subcommittee to review those applications and follow up over email to share who the nominating committee has supported to submit their application through the governor's portal thing, commissions, for review and hopefully appointment by the governor. So I heard back from Karina and Denise, so thanks committee leadership that you're interested in reviewing the applications. I don't know if anyone else wants to be a part of that group. No one else responded to the email, but we're still looking for folks. Otherwise, you are empowering your committee leadership to make that decision. And Denise, jump in if I missed anything for that process.
No, I think that's right. I think our goal is so the end of February is when I think we were actually thinking we'd have a conversation about it here tonight. I think the committee, it's a more people than I think we expected. So we're really grateful for that. It's really nice to have so much interest in the CAC. And I think just doing a little bit of outreach really yielded really, really good candidates. So I think that the question that we're asking is if anybody wants to participate, it's going to be a pretty quick process. I'd like to review the applicants and make a decision, within the next few weeks before the April meeting.
Lori?
Lori's hand is up. Hi, Lori.
Yeah. Hi there. I'm happy to assist provided I can make that time frame. I just don't want to delay things and would defer to the leadership if we can't coordinate on a meeting.
Yeah, same. If you got that.
You cut out a little bit. Were you saying the same as Lori?
Yeah, pretty. Yeah, I'll agree. Same thing though. Don't work. I mean, if it doesn't work for me, to continue on. But yes, I to do that. Sorry, Barry Town really needs to work on their cell service here. Thank you.
Mark?
Same for me. I'm happy to help. But I also had another question, and I wondered whether there was any indication of, I think there's 4 of us that are a couple weeks into or 10 days, 12 days into expired terms, and whether or not they are being advanced or whether there's new openings in addition to the one that's available.
I would assume that they're being advanced, but Sarah has been working on that and she's not on tonight. So I will send an email to follow up with her on that.
Yeah, I meant to follow up. I can't remember. I might have last meeting, but I know we asked to just renew everybody on suite, and there was a bunch that got to the 28th or the 29th. So thanks.
Thanks for that reminder. Okay, so not hearing anything from anyone else, what I'll plan to do is find a time with Denise and Karina and send out that meeting date to folks who are interested in participating in the review. And if you can make the meeting, that's great. If not, we'll follow up with the recommendation before the next meeting.
And you'll send out did we ask for a letter and a resume or
Yep, so everyone sent in a letter of interest and a resume, and they're pretty short, so hopefully not too onerous of a review.
Great. I think the other thing that'll be will be helpful for that meeting, Katie, was we had looked at, skill set and kind of the matrix that we had developed for membership. So that might be helpful to send out as well, so we can see where our gaps are. Oh, Lori's hand is up again.
Sorry, you answered it. I was just going to ask if you could share that with the group so we could just provide input, even if we can't make the meeting.
All right, thanks. And thanks, Basin Program, for getting the word out and getting so many candidates. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I think especially coming off the heels of that big meeting at the Sailing Center, got a lot of people. So real testament to doing an event like that annually. And moving into retreat planning, I realized we had talked about moving the retreat to May instead of July to help adhere to that earlier action plan timeline, and recognize that we're going to have to get moving on that pretty quickly if we're going to go through the state process for locking all of that down. So I wanted to try to get a sense of if there are dates that are out of the question for folks in May, or if there are better times to target, but I can send out a poll too, but it's just helpful to know if there are any blackout dates for anyone in May. And usually the retreat goes from 9 to 3 with a lunch in between.
And I want to reiterate the May timeframe for the retreat was really is to help move up our legislative action plan. And so we've sort of gotten into the habit of meeting in July, I feel like June or July, and it's just pushing it back too late.
Well,
Carol?
the legislature is still meeting in the beginning of May anyway. So I would say the end of May, but not, I'm sure not for anyone near a holiday weekend.
What's the last day of the legislature? Is it usually like the 12th or something, or does it depend on that Friday?
Don't know for sure, but it's probably around then. Yeah. So if it were after then.
But stay away from Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah. I think for everybody.
I'm not a fan of working on holidays, so that's good. All right, any other big red flags for a May retreat for people? It's field season for some. It's ramping up, but hopefully we can get it in before then. Lori?
If you're wanting, dates, May is just a hard month for me, and particularly the end of May because of field season rollouts, and we have a lot of programs, but I'm only one person, totally understand the desire to move forward. I also just hope that we have enough time after the legislature ends and before we go into the retreat to kind of do sort of an analysis or get some feedback on what was accomplished, what are still needed, things that are still needed, and a focal area for us.
Well, we can work on dates. I mean, early June is also an option before school lets out, so I think we basically have like the last 2 weeks of May and maybe the first week of June, we should look at Katie.
That sounds good.
Mark?
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's important because it's the beginning of the new biennium. And so having that debrief recap really can inform as we've been sort of focusing on setting out something over the next 2 years, right, for the next biennium. And so that, as Lori mentioned, that I think that's an important piece of it, is the opportunity to just sort of pause, reassess, figure out what's next and what our priorities might be. So, and I'm gone the first 2 weeks in June, so.
So the last 2 weeks of May, we're back to.
Yeah,
tough.
hi, this is Bob Fisher. I'm gone pretty much same as Mark, and my daughter's getting married in the beginning
That's
of.
exciting. Okay, all right.
Woo-woo.
Anybody else have any big like red flag conflicts that you want to share right now? We'll do our best to make sure we can accommodate everybody's schedule. So, better days of the week than others. I love Fridays and Mondays are great for me, typically, like from my work related schedule. I don't know if anybody else has anything like that.
I know the legislature might still be meeting in mid-May, but we have a meeting that's scheduled on the 13th. Is that right? So would that day be a day?
Could be a Monday.
That's not a bad idea.
Just do the afternoon and roll into the meeting maybe or something, or still do the daytime.
Yeah, well, we usually meet for hours and hours. We usually meet from 9 to 10, 9 or 10 to 2 or 3.
Yeah, 9 to 3 usually.
9 to 3, yeah.
Mondays are hard for me. Fridays are preferred, but if I knew in advance, I could make it work.
Well, I'll send out a poll, I think, for not around Memorial Day, but those last 2 weeks of May, and we can try to figure out what will work best for folks, and hopefully there's sufficient time to get something figured out that'll work for most people. And then I will always accept suggestions for location if anyone feels strongly about any particular place, hoping to have most people in person, but also it's always good to have an option for hybrid if plans change.
And Katie, to be clear, that would replace our, like, if we had a different date in May, that would replace the May 13th schedule,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we wouldn't double up on meetings in May.
I mean, I think that, yeah, so I think once Katie kind of does a doodle poll, if we could get back to her pretty quickly, that would be really helpful. Okay. And is there anything else on the agenda, Katie?
Yes. So update on the per diems and reimbursements. So there's a different form now than the one that those of you who submitted a reimbursement form filled out. It doesn't affect anyone who didn't submit for mileage, but if you did submit for mileage, that form that auto-populated some calculation was using the wrong reimbursement rate. So Denise, that's why I sent you back a form today that had new math done. So you'll get more money, which is exciting, but it is another form that you have to sign now. So that's the difference with that form. And now there's, yeah, so the mileage rate has been updated and it's an Excel file now that we'll use moving forward that I will send out after this meeting. But looking to have the per diem reimbursement requests for January through March by the end of the month. I don't have any updates on the timeline of how long it takes to get the per diem reimbursements or anything, and Sarah's not on, so she can't answer that, but I will just say we appreciate your patience as we work through this new process for the two of us.
Thank you, Katie.
Lastly, Denise, I just wanted to confirm you're able to make the executive committee meeting on. Perfect. Thank you.
Thursday. Yep. I thought I had something, but that got canceled, so I think it's in person at the Basin program. So you're off the hook.
Thank you. That's helpful just because I have a busy week. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think Carrie sent the agenda out today, Meg, so I'll take a look at it, but I'll be there.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
And then the last thing, our next meeting is scheduled for April 8th, same time, 5 to 7. Denise, I know at one point you were interested in maybe doing some meetings back in person / hybrid. I don't know if that's something you wanted to start in April. But
let's do the May retreat in person, and then we can talk maybe about whether or not we want to start doing a quarterly meeting in person or not, or we could just pick a few meetings throughout the year. I know the feedback I felt like from people, yeah, it's nice to meet in person, and it's really convenient to meet online for night meetings. Just it saves so much time, and you can still feed your children, which they appreciate.
An important detail.
Important detail.
So that April 8th meeting, we had discussed focusing on public access and recreation. So perhaps getting an update from Fish and Wildlife on the Otter Creek Paddlers Trail. Maybe Meg wants to speak to and May Kate can speak to the DEI fishing workshops. But if that still sounds like a good topic to pursue, I can get rolling on getting those.
I'd love a presentation on VOREC too.
Yeah.
Just like what they've funded, like what projects, what the outcomes have been. I just heard somebody that applied for one of their grants and I think got it, and I was really excited about it. So I'd love to get, and what the funding is going to be this year, if we know that yet from the governor's budget, but it's such an important program. I feel like I don't know enough about it, and I'd love to learn more. Like tonight, I thought that was a great presentation, both of them. But the wetlands, I'd love to get her a road show. It's so important, and I don't think people recognize the value or the importance of wetlands, and also how robust of a program Vermont has.
Well, can I say something about that? Maybe, we should put together blurbs and then have them go out on Front Porch Forum all across the state. We could use people who care, partners, there are all kinds of partners who might have connections across the state to be able to put these things in over time so we can educate.
Yeah, and I don't know if we could share the recording from tonight's, if people are like, that would be
Share
really
a link,
interesting.
but I mean,
share a link.
little blurbs are, could just say these 3 blurbs or things you ought to know, and here's the link to this report. I mean, we should
Here's
always be doing that.
Yeah, especially if we're like really intending to educate the citizens on what we're doing and what we're learning. So
I wonder, how much does it cost to put ads so that we wouldn't have to find volunteers to put it out across the state on Front Porch Forum?
So some organizations have, and I don't know if Basin Program does or the state, but some like NMC it still shows up as a community member post, but we pay to be able to post on all, and I think we get like 2 a month. So that's the community hospital that I work with, but we buy a spot so that we can put something in Front Porch Forum in every community in our region, I think twice a month.
Well, that's maybe a partner, like a hospital would say, well, or another thing is we've got legislators all over the state senators all over the state. They reach every Front Porch Forum. When you look at all 30 of them, You could get all 30 of them to post, there's something. Or you ask 150 state reps to post. Maybe not everybody will do it, but probably a lot of them will. People are looking for good things to post. It has to be in form, easy to cut and paste.
Cut and paste.
Yep.
Totally easy.
Using Front Porch Forum, I think, is a great idea, but we would be using Lake Champlain Basin Program social media outreach as well for these things, or
Sure. I just said like Front Porch Forum, but
Yeah.
I mean, we can brainstorm all the places there are to put these things out and then get them out. And ask the people, like with your list that you just mentioned, Mr. Bowden, you could say, please, post this where you on your Instagram or Facebook or wherever,
Right.
for your members. I would think in a cut and paste, easy to do thing. And then, we're blanketing the state that way. If we just learn about this here, it
It doesn't go anywhere, right? I mean, we take it forward through the action plan when we come up, but
True.
I agree. I think to get more people on board, I mean, especially something as important as wetlands for climate sequestration or for carbon sequestration and climate change, like all of that, I just think it's so valuable.
And there's a climate caucus at the State House. If we provided it to them, they could make use of it. And maybe at our retreat, maybe we could bring some ideas. One of the action items or things that on the retreat could be to discuss how we can get the word out, what we want to share and how.
Yeah, Katie, and I'd be interested to know if the Basin program has the same sort of deal with Front Porch Forum that you can post.
think that we do, because when we have Love the Lake events, there's usually a request that goes out to all of us to post in our respective Front Porch Forums. So I will check, but I don't think we have the same deal.
And finally, if we want to pass legislation or ask for an appropriation, then we should put that on our agenda for how we can get that done. With using our partners, using people in the community who care about things so that they write their legislators or call their legislators.
Great idea, and maybe we should just put communications in general on our, but this is really, I think, important. And it was so nice to have such a great turnout today from the public. So really hoping we can continue to emulate that going forward.
I'm glad you said that, because that's another thing is all the people who came to what we had down at the waterfront, they might be very interested in coming to meetings if they know ahead of time what the agenda item is, not just listen to us, whatever, but if they know that they'll hear a really good presentation about something and that they could ask questions.
I just looked very quickly, and for 20,000 ad impressions, and I have no idea what that really means on Front Porch Forum, premium and basic ads run between $230 and $450 per ad.
I can find out from the hospital what we do, because it's not quite an ad. It just gives us permission to post in all the Front Porch Forums across our region, all the towns that we serve, basically. So it's not the whole state, but it's all the towns in Franklin and Grand Isle counties that have Front Porch Forum.
That sounds pretty reasonable to me, Mr. Bowden.
I think it would be great if you could check out what it costs now. I know we looked into it for our monitoring program, and it was at the time, this is maybe about 5 years ago, it was pretty cost prohibitive to cover all the territories. And so we just ended up in our outreach creating a Front Porch Forum post and asking recipients of on our recipient list, here's the Front Porch Forum post for this week's write-up, can you post it? And we are really specific about, we give them all the language for it, but it would be great to get new updates on really what that cost is.
It is after time, everybody. Thank you for staying on. So have a great month, and we'll hopefully have a nice, robust conversation next month about recreation. I'm excited about that. And in between, we'll figure out who our new member is going to be, and schedule the retreat. So we have a little bit of work to do over the next 30 days.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck with the end of the session.
Bye.